A black chief, disguised, faces brutal humiliation in his own precinct. Will his hidden truth spark justice? Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for our latest videos. Don't miss this epic saga of courage. A single drop of water clung to James Whitaker's cheek, cold and mocking, as he stood in the Richmond Police Precinct's bullpen, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a storm about to break, their harsh glare exposing every crack in the linoleum and every shard of cruelty in the eyes of the officers surrounding him. James, a black man cloaked in a worn white t-shirt and a frayed checkered shirt, was no janitor. Though the mop in his hands and the slurs hurled at him suggested otherwise, he was the newly appointed police chief, his badge a hidden fire in his pocket, his identity a tightly guarded secret, his every move recorded by a tiny camera pinned to his collar. The precinct was a cauldron of arrogance and unchecked power, its air thick with stale coffee and sharper with malice. The radios crackling, the phones ringing, but the real noise was the laughter of Officer Derek Callahan, a white cop whose smirk was a weapon, his voice slicing through the din as he tossed a crumpled coffee cup at James's chest. "Pick it up, new guy," Callahan barked, the cup hitting James's arm, the room erupting in jeers, a chorus of white faces feeding off the humiliation. James bent slowly, his jaw a steel line, the camera capturing the cup's arc, the laughter's edge, the casual venom. Officer Mike Larson, lean and sneering, leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "What's wrong, buddy?" Too dumb to talk. The words were knives, but James's face remained a fortress, his hand steady on the mop, the camera's red light blinking like a heartbeat. The abuse escalated. A relentless barrage racial slurs spat in passing, lazy and useless thrown like punches, each one a test James endured with a silence that burned hotter than rage. Callahan, drunk on the room's approval, grabbed a water bottle and sprayed it directly into James's face, the icy stream soaking his shirt, dripping from his chin, the precinct exploding in laughter that echoed like gunfire. "Clean yourself up, boy," Callahan sneered, his eyes glinting with triumph, oblivious to the camera's unblinking gaze. James wiped his face with a sleeve, water pooling at his feet, his eyes meeting Callahan's for a split second, a flicker of steel beneath his calm, a promise of reckoning buried in his silence. The precinct's rot was raw complaints from Black and Latino communities ignored, officers joking about teaching lessons to suspects, a culture that thrived on dominance. James moved to the break room, emptying trash as Larson tossed a banana peel at his boots, another officer accidentally shoving him into a wall. Each act caught on camera, a digital ledger of their sins. Sergeant Paul Grayson, a veteran with cold eyes, watched from a corner, his silence as complicit as Callahan's cruelty, his inaction a brick in the department's decaying foundation. James's mind flashed to his mission, a secret pact with the mayor after years of scandal's brutality, cover-ups, eroded trust. He'd agreed to this disguise, to walk through the fire of their hate, to gather the truth no report could capture. The camera was his sword, its footage a guillotine waiting to fall. Captain Tom Reynolds, a grizzled white officer, summoned James to his office, tossing a list of menial tasks: scrub toilets, sweep lockers, his voice curt, his eyes dismissing James as less than nothing. "Don't screw this up, Whitaker," Reynolds said, unaware he was addressing his superior, the irony thick as James nodded, his voice a low, "Yes, sir," the camera catching Reynolds' sneer. Back in the bullpen, Callahan cornered James by the lockers, his breath hot, his voice a growl. "You're not one of us, got it," he said, shoving James's shoulder hard, the camera recording the jolt, the threat, the power play. James held his ground, his eyes unyielding, his silence a weapon sharper than words. The shift ended with James in a supply closet, checking the camera's footage. Hours of abuse distilled into a searing truth: slurs, violence, contempt. He secured the device, his heart a furnace, his purpose a blade honed by every insult. A city council meeting loomed, where he'd shed his disguise and unleash the evidence, a moment to break the precinct's spine and rebuild it. Whispers of a new chief stirred outside, news vans circling, but no one suspected the man they drenched was the one who'd soon command them. James stepped into the hall, water stains on his shirt, his boots heavy, his badge a hidden vow. The precinct's laughter still echoed, but James Whitaker, disguised as prey, was a predator poised to strike. His humiliation a spark that would ignite a revolution in a department blind to its own collapse. James Whitaker pushed his mop across the Richmond precinct's scuffed linoleum, the stale air heavy with the scent of coffee and contempt. His worn white t-shirt and frayed checkered shirt, a perfect disguise for the police chief no one suspected he was. The water stains from Officer Derek Callahan's attack the previous day had dried, but the sting of humiliation lingered, fueling James's resolve as the tiny camera pinned to his collar recorded every moment, its red light a silent pulse capturing the precinct's rot. Officers moved around him, their voices a low hum of arrogance, their glances dismissive, unaware that the man they mocked held their fate in his hands. The precinct was a pressure cooker, its culture of casual racism and unchecked power seeping into every interaction, slurs muttered in the break room, complaints from Black and Latino residents tossed into shredders, laughter at the expense of the powerless. James kept his head down, his mop gliding in steady arcs, but his eyes were sharp, cataloging each insult, each act of cruelty, the camera building a case that would soon shatter the department's illusions. Officer Mike Larson, his sneer a permanent fixture, tossed a crumpled soda can at James's feet, his voice dripping with malice. "Missed one, janitor," he said, sparking chuckles from nearby officers, the camera catching the can's glint and Larson's grin. James picked it up without a word, his silence a steel cage around his fury, his heart a furnace stoked by every slight. Sergeant Paul Grayson, a veteran with a cold stare, watched from his desk, his silence as damning as the other's taunts, the camera noting his inaction like a judge's gavel. James's mind drifted to the path that brought him here, a childhood in a neighborhood where cops were feared, not trusted. A vow to change that after his brother was beaten by police at 16, a meteoric rise through the academy, and a clandestine appointment as chief to clean a department rotten with scandal. The mayor had insisted on the disguise, a way to see the truth unfiltered, and James had agreed, knowing the only way to rebuild was to face the ugliness head-on. The camera was his witness, its footage a growing arsenal. Captain Tom Reynolds called James to his office, his scowl deepening as he shoved a list of tasks clean the evidence room, scrubbed the holding cells, his tone sharp, his eyes barely glancing up. "Don't slack off, Whitaker," Reynolds said, oblivious that he was addressing his superior, the camera capturing his curt dismissal. James nodded, his voice a low yes, sir, his calm a mask over the fire within. Back in the bullpen, Callahan cornered him near the coffee machine, his breath hot, his voice a growl. "You're a nobody here." "Got it," he said, jabbing James's chest, the camera recording the shove, the threat, the power play. James held his ground, his eyes steady, his silence louder than any retort, the footage piling up like kindling for a blaze. The precinct's daily rhythm revealed more officers joking about roughing up suspects, a Black woman's complaint about harassment ignored, a Latino teenager's arrest report altered to justify force. James, mopping near the records room, overheard Grayson and Larson laughing about teaching respect to a shoplifter, the camera catching their words, their ease, their belief in untouchability. Each moment was a brick in the case James was building, a truth he'd unleash at the city council meeting in days, where he'd shed his disguise and confront the department with its own reflection. The weight of his secret pressed against him, but so did his purpose, a vow to his brother, to his community, to himself. Late in the shift, James slipped into a supply closet, checking the camera's footage. The hours of abuse, a stark portrait, Callahan's water spray, Larson's can, Grayson's silence, Reynolds' disdain. He backed up the files to a secure drive, his hands steady, his heart racing with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The precinct's culture was a cancer, and he was the surgeon, ready to cut deep. Outside, whispers of a new chief stirred, news vans circling the precinct, but no one connected the dots to the man they had humiliated. James's mind flashed to his academy days, the instructors who doubted him, the promotions he'd earned through grit, the mayor's call offering him this role a chance to remake a broken system. He'd accepted, knowing the hate he'd faced. The camera's weight was nothing compared to the badge in his pocket, a symbol of the power he'd soon wield. As the shift ended, Callahan bumped James's shoulder accidentally, his smirk a challenge, the camera catching the jolt, the provocation. James met his gaze, a flicker of defiance breaking through, but he turned away. His silence a strategy, his plan a ticking clock. The council meeting loomed, a stage where he'd unveil his identity and the footage, a moment to break the precinct's spine and forge a new path. James stepped out of the closet, his boots heavy, his shirt still stained, his badge a hidden vow. The precinct's laughter followed him, but James Whitaker, cloaked in deception, was a man poised to turn their scorn into a reckoning, his truth of fire ready to burn the old ways to ash. The Richmond City Council chamber was a crucible of anticipation, its polished oak tables and high ceilings dwarfed by the electric tension that crackled through the packed room, where city officials, reporters, and community leaders sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the podium where a bombshell was about to detonate. James Whitaker, the black man who'd endured days of humiliation as a supposed janitor in the police precinct, stood at the back, his worn white t-shirt and frayed checkered shirt a stark contrast to the suits around him. His face calm but his heart a furnace, the hidden camera's footage burning in a drive clutched in his pocket, his badge a secret vow ready to be unleashed. The precinct's officers, Derek Callahan, Mike Larson, Captain Tom Reynolds, Sergeant Paul Grayson sat in the front row, their faces a mix of boredom and arrogance, unaware that the man they'd mocked was about to upend their world. Mayor Evelyn Harris, a sharp-eyed woman who'd orchestrated James's covert appointment, opened the meeting, her voice steady as she announced the introduction of the new police chief, a move to address the department's scandals. Whispers rippled through the crowd, reporters' pens poised, cameras rolling, but no one suspected the figure in the tattered shirt slipping toward the podium. James stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor, the room's hum fading as eyes turned to him, confusion knitting brows, Callahan's smirk twitching with recognition. He reached the podium, his movements deliberate, and leaned into the microphone, his voice low but resonant, each word a hammer. "My name is James Whitaker, and I am your new chief of police," he said, pausing as gasps erupted, the council chamber exploding into murmurs, cameras flashing like gunfire. Callahan's face drained of color. Larson's jaw dropped. Reynolds leaned forward, his scowl frozen. Grayson's eyes widened, the precinct's officers reeling as if struck. James pulled his badge from his pocket, holding it high, its gleam a beacon under the lights. The room falling silent, the weight of his words sinking in. "For days, I've walked among you as a janitor, unseen, unheard, and what I found was a department rotting from within." He continued, his voice rising, a blade cutting through the shock. He plugged the drive into a laptop, and the screen behind him flickered to life, playing the camera's footage, Callahan spraying water in his face, Larson tossing a soda can, officers hurling slurs, Grayson's silent complicity, Reynolds' dismissive tasks. The gallery gasped, reporters scribbling furiously, council members leaning forward, their faces a mix of horror and outrage. The footage looped, each frame a nail in the precinct's coffin. The laughter of the officers now a haunting echo in the silent room. James's eyes swept the crowd, locking onto Callahan's, then Reynolds, his voice unwavering. This is not a police force, it's a fraternity of abuse, and it ends today, he said, his words a thunderclap. He presented a list of officers involved, recommending immediate suspensions for Callahan, Larson, and 3 others, pending investigation, and called for a federal probe into the department's practices. Mayor Harris nodded, her face grim but resolute, as she endorsed James's actions, her voice amplifying his. Chief Whitaker has my full support, she said, sparking applause from community leaders. Reverend Clara Thompson, activist Marcus Bell, who stood, their cheers a wave that drowned out the officers' stunned silence. The precinct's officers shifted, Callahan's fists clenched, Larson whispering to Grayson, their panic palpable. But James stood tall, his badge a shield, his truth a sword. The revelation sent shockwaves beyond the chamber. News vans outside broadcasting live. Chief Whitaker trending as clips of the footage spread online. Millions watching Callahan's water spray. James's calm defiance. The badges reveal. The public split Black and Latino communities rallied, their signs reading Whitaker for justice, while conservative forums decried James as a deceiver, accusing him of entrapment. Inside, the council voted to suspend the named officers, with Callahan escorted out by security, his glare burning into James, a promise of retaliation. James met his stare, unyielding, his heart steady despite the storm he'd unleashed. The meeting adjourned, but the chaos surged, reporters mobbing James, community leaders embracing him, Marcus Bell's voice booming. This is our chief. James slipped away to a side room, where Mayor Harris clasped his hand, her eyes fierce. You've started a war, but you're not alone, she said. James nodded, the weight of his badge heavier now, the footage's impact a fire he'd lit but couldn't yet control. His mind flashed to his brother's bruised face years ago, the reason he'd taken this path, the vow that drove him through every insult. The precinct was in turmoil, officers whispering of betrayal, others shaken by the truth, the department's soul laid bare. James checked his phone, texts from his mother flooding in. You made us proud. The footage was a viral indictment, but the fight was just beginning, with enemies already plotting to tear him down. James stepped back into the chamber, the crowd's cheers a shield, his badge a vow to rebuild what hate had broken, a chief unmasked and ready to lead through the fire. The Richmond Police Precinct was a tinderbox, its corridors simmering with whispers and glares in the wake of James Whitaker's bombshell revelation at the city council meeting, where the Black chief, disguised as a janitor, had exposed a culture of racism and abuse with damning camera footage. The suspensions of officers Derek Callahan, Mike Larson, and 3 others had sent shockwaves. But the department's soul was far from cleansed, its old guard rallying to strike back. James sat in his new office, his badge now openly displayed, the weight of his role heavier than ever as he pored over internal reports, the faint hum of the precinct's unrest seeping through the walls. His deputy, Captain Elena Torres, a Latina with a sharp mind and a fiercer loyalty, stood by, her tablet glowing with a leaked memo accusing James of fabricating evidence to entrap officers. The document's author anonymous, but its intent clear to paint him as a power-hungry fraud. They're coming for you, Elena warned, her voice low but urgent. James's eyes, steely with resolve, met hers. Let them try, he said, his voice a quiet thunder. Knowing the backlash was only beginning, the precinct's officers were divided, some, shaken by the footage, whispered of reform, while others, loyal to Callahan's clique, spread the memo's lies, their resentment fueled by James's deception and his race. A forged report surfaced online, claiming James had altered arrest logs to justify the suspensions, its details convincing enough to spark a conservative radio host's tirade, calling him a deceptive activist in a badge. The accusations stung, but James's focus was razor sharp, his mind tracing the memo's origins to a group of veteran officers led by Sergeant Paul Grayson, whose silent complicity in the footage now seemed a prelude to active rebellion. Elena's team uncovered Grayson's digital fingerprints on the memo, sent from a precinct computer, and James ordered an internal audit of all communications. His voice firm. "We're digging out the rot," he told her, knowing each move would escalate the fight. Outside, the public was a fractured mirror. Black and Latino communities rallied, their protests outside City Hall drawing thousands. Led by Reverend Clara Thompson and activist Marcus Bell, their signs reading "Whitaker for Justice" and "Clean the Precinct." A Black-owned barbershop hung James's photo beside civil rights icons, while a Latino youth group painted a mural of his badge, its colors bold and defiant. But counter-protests flared, fueled by the radio host's rants, with white residents and off-duty cops waving thin blue line flags, chanting "Support our boys," their anger clashing with Bell's marchers, police lines straining to keep peace. Social media amplified the divide. Hashtag Chief Whitaker trending alongside #Back the Blue. The forged report shared millions of times, its lies burrowing into public doubt. Inside the precinct, the backlash turned personal. James's office door was defaced with a racial slur, scratched deep into the wood, and his car's tires were slashed in the parking lot. The axe anonymous but pointed. Elena urged a security detail, but James refused, his badge a shield, his resolve forged in the humiliations he'd endured. He met with the city attorney, Laura Chen, to counter the forged report, presenting metadata proving its falsification, traced to Grayson's login, file charges obstruction, defamation. James said, his voice unyielding. Chen nodded, her caution giving way to admiration, but warned of union pushback. "They'll call it a witch hunt," she said. James's response was ice. "Then let them burn in the truth." He held a press conference, flanked by Elena and Marcus, his badge gleaming under camera lights. "The lies stop here," he said, displaying the metadata, debunking the forged report, and announcing a federal review of the department, requested by Mayor Harris. The speech, live-streamed to millions, drew cheers from Bell's rally, but sparked fury in the precinct. Officers whispering of betrayal, Grayson's clique plotting in hushed tones. James's investigation deepened, uncovering a 2019 case where Grayson had buried a brutality complaint against Callahan. The victim, a Black teenager. He reopened the case, meeting the victim's mother, who wept as she thanked him, her gratitude a spark against the growing threats a brick through his office window. A voicemail snarling, "You're done, Whitaker." James handed the evidence to Elena, his voice calm. "They're desperate. That's our edge." The community's support was a lifeline. Donations to a reform fund hit $200,000 funding legal aid for police victims, while Clara's church hosted a prayer vigil, their hymns a shield. James visited the mural, touching its painted badge, the crowd's cheers steadying him. He met with Bell and Clara, planning a community policing initiative, their alliance a cornerstone. His mother's texts anchored him. "You're their fear, son. Keep going." The precinct's unrest grew, with graffiti chief out scrawled in the locker room. But James walked past, his head high, his badge a vow. The federal review loomed, and with it, the chance to dismantle Grayson's network. But the backlash was a gathering storm, testing James's every step as a chief forged in deception but driven by truth. The Richmond Police Precinct was a battlefield of loyalties, its corridors crackling with tension as James Whitaker, the Black chief who'd exposed a racist culture through a daring disguise, faced a vicious counterattack from within. The forged report accusing him of falsifying evidence had been debunked, but Sergeant Paul Grayson's clique, emboldened by their union's backing, spread whispers of James's abuse of power, their lies seeping into conservative media and fueling public doubt. James stood in his office, his badge a steady anchor, his eyes scanning a stack of internal audits as Captain Elena Torres, his fierce deputy, delivered a bombshell metadata from a precinct server confirmed Grayson's team had fabricated 2 more documents, including a fake complaint alleging James had coerced a suspect. "They're doubling down," Elena said, her voice tight with urgency. James's jaw clenched, but his resolve was a furnace, his voice low and unyielding. "Then we hit harder," he said, ordering a full forensic sweep of the precinct's systems to trace every falsified file. The precinct's air was thick with suspicion. Officers eyeing each other warily, some swayed by James's press conference exposing the lies, others clinging to Grayson's narrative, their resentment a palpable heat. James launched his counterstrike, meeting with the city attorney, Laura Chen, to file charges against Grayson and his allies for obstruction and falsification. His evidence, ironclad server logs, IP addresses, and a whistleblower's testimony from a young officer, Maria Sanchez, who'd overheard Grayson plotting in the locker room. Chen, now fully behind James, pushed the case to the district attorney, warning of a firestorm from the union. "Let it burn," James replied, his eyes blazing, his badge a vow to dismantle the corruption choking his department. He went public, holding a second press conference flanked by Elena and activist Marcus Bell, his voice a clarion call under the camera lights. "This department will not be held hostage by lies," he said, presenting the forensic evidence, debunking the new forgeries, and announcing sweeping reforms, mandatory body cam reviews, anti-bias training for all officers, and a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. The speech, live-streamed to millions, sparked cheers from Reverend Clara Thompson's vigil outside, where Black and Latino communities rallied, their signs had Whitaker for justice held high, but it ignited fury in the precinct, with graffiti traitor chief scrawled across a hallway. James's reforms began to take root, with a dozen officers signing up for training, led by Lieutenant David Kim, a Korean-American who'd quietly admired James's courage. But the backlash was relentless. James's car was vandalized, its windshield shattered in the precinct lot, and a threatening note was slipped under his office door. "You'll regret this. Whitaker." Elena insisted on a security detail, and this time James agreed, his focus unbroken, his heart steeled by the memory of his brother's beating years ago. The spark that drove him to this fight. The community's support was a lifeline. Donations to the Reform Fund soared to $300,000, funding legal aid for police victims, while a Black-owned diner sent James a coffee mug inscribed "Chief Unbroken," a gesture that steadied him. Marcus Bell organized a march, drawing thousands, where Clara's choir sang hymns of justice, their voices a shield against the counter-protests, where thin blue line flags waved and shouts of "Back our cops" clashed with marchers, police lines straining to keep order. James met with Clara and Marcus, their alliance a cornerstone, and launched a community policing pilot, pairing officers with local leaders to rebuild trust. Kim leading the first patrol. The initiative drew CNN coverage, framing James as a reformer against a corrupt system, but it also provoked darker threats, a brick hurled through his home's window, the glass shattering as his mother, visiting, pulled him to safety. "They're scared." "Son," she said, her voice fierce, her hug a fortress. James clung to her words, his badge a talisman against fear. The investigation into Grayson's clique uncovered a deeper rot, a 2018 case where Grayson had falsified a report to clear Callahan of assaulting a Latino teen, the evidence buried in a misfiled archive. James reopened the case, meeting the teen's father, who gripped his hand, tears in his eyes. "You're giving us hope," he said, his words fueling James's drive. He pushed for federal oversight, coordinating with an FBI liaison, Agent Sarah Patel, who warned of entrenched resistance in the precinct. "Keep your allies close," Patel said. And James nodded, trusting Elena, Kim, and Sanchez, whose whistleblowing had cracked the conspiracy wider. The precinct's dynamics shifted. More officers, inspired by Sanchez's courage, reported misconduct, their tips flooding a new hotline James had set up, each one a step toward accountability. But Grayson's allies struck back, leaking a doctored audio clip to a conservative blog, claiming James had threatened an officer. The distortion subtle but damaging. James countered with the original recording, obtained from precinct security, proving the clip's manipulation, and aired it at a community forum, where Bell's voice boomed, "Our chief speaks truth." The crowd roared, their faith a bulwark, but the threats persisted, a slashed tire, a whispered "watch your back" in the precinct hall. James walked past the graffiti, his head high, his badge a vow to press on. The reforms a foundation he'd died defending, his counterstrike a fire that was burning away the precinct's lies. The Richmond Police Precinct was a house divided, its walls reverberating with the aftershocks of James Whitaker's counterstrike against a conspiracy that had sought to discredit him. The air thick with the scent of fear and defiance as officers grappled with the new chief's unyielding push for reform. James stood in his office, his badge a steady beacon, his eyes scanning a confidential FBI report delivered by Agent Sarah Patel, detailing a web of misconduct that stretched beyond Sergeant Paul Grayson's clique to a decades-long culture of cover-ups in the department. The forged documents and doctored audio aimed at James were just the surface. Patel's findings pointed to a systemic pattern of suppressed complaints, falsified reports, and intimidation of minority communities. With Grayson's network at its core, James's heart pounded, but his resolve was granite. His voice firm as he met with Captain Elena Torres and Lieutenant David Kim. "This isn't just a few bad apples, it's a poison tree," he said, ordering a full partnership with the FBI to expand the investigation. His badge a vow to uproot the corruption choking his precinct. The department was a powder keg, with some officers, inspired by whistleblower Maria Sanchez, reporting misconduct via James's new hotline, while others, loyal to Grayson, whispered of disloyalty, their glares a silent threat. Elena uncovered a 2017 incident where Grayson had buried evidence of Officer Derek Callahan's assault on a black motorist. The case misfiled as unsubstantiated, and James reopened it, meeting the victim, now a mechanic, who gripped his hand, his voice thick. "You're the first one who listened," he said, his words fueling James's fire. The FBI probe escalated, with Patel's team seizing precinct servers, their searches unearthing a trove of hidden complaints, dozens involving Black and Latino residents, spanning years, all dismissed by Grayson's allies. James coordinated with the city attorney, Laura Chen, to build criminal cases, his evidence mounting email chains, altered logs, witness testimonies. "This could dismantle half the precinct," Chen warned, her tone cautious but supportive. James's response was steel. "Then we rebuild it right." The investigation's ripples stirred the public, with Reverend Clara Thompson and activist Marcus Bell organizing a community forum at a local church, drawing hundreds Black families, Latino organizers, white allies who shared stories of police abuse, their voices a chorus of pain and hope. "Chief Whitaker's fighting for us," Marcus said, his live stream sparking #Whitaker for justice to trend, the forum's energy a lifeline for James, who attended, his badge gleaming as he spoke. "We're not just cleaning the precinct, we're building trust," he said. His words met with applause, a Black teenager hugging him, her tears a spark of change. But the backlash was fierce. Conservative media, led by a radio host, amplified claims that James was weaponizing the FBI, while Grayson's allies leaked a doctored video to a blog, showing James seemingly ignoring a citizen's complaint. The clip manipulated but viral. James countered at a press conference, presenting the unedited footage, his voice a blade. "The truth doesn't bend," he said, debunking the lie, his speech rallying thousands outside, where Clara's choir sang. their hymns a shield. The precinct's unrest grew, with a fire alarm triggered falsely, chaos erupting as officers evacuated. A swastika scrawled on James's office wall in the confusion, the act a chilling escalation. Elena traced it to a Grayson loyalist, who was suspended, but the threats intensified. A Molotov cocktail hurled at James's car in the precinct lot, extinguished by security before it ignited. The attack a stark warning. "They're desperate," Elena said, her eyes fierce, urging James to work from a secure location. He refused, his badge a defiance, his mother's voice a daily anchor. "You're their reckoning, son." James's reforms pressed forward at body cam audits caught 2 officers using excessive force, leading to their suspensions. While anti-bias training, led by Kim, gained traction, with 30 officers enrolled, their attitudes shifting, he launched a community walk-along program, joining Marcus and Clara on a patrol, their presence calming a tense neighborhood. CNN capturing the moment, framing James as a bridge between police and people. But the investigation's stakes soared when Patel uncovered a 2015 payoff to silence a brutality victim, orchestrated by Grayson's mentor, a retired captain. James met the victim, a Latino shopkeeper, who shared his story, his courage bolstering James's resolve. The FBI prepared charges, but Patel warned of high-level pushback from union leaders with political ties. "Stay sharp," she said, and James nodded, trusting his core team, Elena, Kim, Sanchez, and now Marcus and Clara, whose community ties were vital. The precinct's hotline buzzed with new tips, each a crack in the old guard's armor. But the danger was palpable, a shadowed figure caught on precinct cameras near James's office, unidentifiable but ominous. James walked past the swastika, untouched to preserve evidence, his head high, his badge a vow. The investigation was a wildfire, burning away lies but risking everything, with James at its center, a chief whose truth was reshaping a department on the edge of collapse or redemption. The police precinct was a crucible of transformation, its wall vibrating with the fallout of James Whitaker's relentless fight against a corrupt culture. The air charged as an FBI investigation dismantled a network of cover-ups led by Sergeant Paul Grayson and his allies. James stood in his office, his badge a quiet symbol of his resolve, his eyes scanning a sealed FBI warrant as Agent Sarah Patel briefed him on a dawn raid that had arrested Grayson and 4 key conspirators. Their capture a devastating blow to the department's old guard. The raid had seized laptops, burner phones, and falsified reports, linking the group to a 2016 brutality case buried to shield Officer Derek Callahan. The evidence a damning web of lies. James's pulse quickened, but his voice was iron as he met with Captain Elena Torres and Lieutenant David Kim. "This is where we turn the tide," he said, his badge a vow to reshape the precinct. The department was a fractured battlefield. Some officers, inspired by Maria Sanchez's whistleblowing, embraced James's reforms, while Grayson's loyalists spread rumors of overreach, their influence waning as the arrests shifted the balance. Elena uncovered a ledger of payoffs to silence victims, implicating a retired deputy chief, and James pushed for federal charges, meeting the city attorney, Laura Chen, to secure convictions. This could spark a backlash. Chen cautioned, noting union ties to political figures. James's reply was unyielding. "We'll face it with truth," he said, his eyes fierce, seizing the moment to root out corruption. The public's response was a surge of support. Reverend Clara Thompson and Marcus Bell led a rally outside City Hall, drawing thousands. Their signs had Whitaker for Justice held high as Black, Latino, and white communities united, their chants a beacon of hope. Clara's voice rang out. "Our chief is breaking chains, fueling #clean the precinct to trend." The rally live-streamed to millions. A Latino-owned cafe sent James a banner reading "Chief of Truth," while a reform fund hit $400,000 supporting community policing and victim aid. James joined the rally, his badge shining as he spoke, his words raw. "This fight is for every silenced voice," he said, a black mother embracing him, her tears a spark of renewal. But resistance persisted. A forged email, leaked to a conservative blog, accused James of misusing funds, debunked by Elena's audit, but damaging enough to fuel radio attacks labeling him a corrupt reformer. James countered at a press conference, presenting the audit, his voice sharp. "Lies won't stop us," he said, unveiling a civilian oversight board to monitor complaints, a policy that drew cheers from Marcus's marchers, but outrage from the union, who threatened a walkout. The precinct's transformation accelerated body cam audits led to 3 suspensions. Anti-bias training grew under Kim's lead, and a community walk-along program cut arrests in tense areas. CNN capturing James patrolling with Marcus, their dialogue a model of trust. The investigation's reach widened when Patel's team arrested a union official tied to the payoffs, weakening the old guard's political clout. James met a 2016 brutality victim, a black driver, whose gratitude, "You're giving us justice," steeled his resolve. The FBI uncovered a 2014 case where Grayson's mentor framed a Latino activist, and James reopened it, working with Patel to pursue charges, her warning of powerful enemies a reminder of the stakes. James's allies, Elena, Kim, Sanchez, Clara, Marcus were a bulwark, their loyalty a lifeline as threats continued, a slashed tire on his security van, a hissed, "You're done in the precinct hall." James passed a swastika, preserved as evidence, his head high, his badge, a vow. The precinct's hotline surged with tips, officers turning on Grayson's allies, their courage echoing Sanchez's, with 20 more joining reform training, their mindsets shifting. James launched a mental health program for officers, addressing stress, winning over skeptics, the precinct's culture tilting toward accountability. The community's support was a fortress. Donations funded a youth policing scholarship, and a black church choir sang at a vigil, their hymns a shield. James visited his mother, her voice a guiding light. "You're rewriting history," she said, her embrace a sanctuary. The turning point was clear. Grayson's network was collapsing, the precinct realigning, James's reforms taking hold, but the fight endured, with enemies in the shadows. His badge both a target and a promise, as he led a department reborn through unrelenting truth. James Whitaker stood before a sea of faces in the precinct's briefing room, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his voice resonant as he addressed a department transformed by his relentless fight against corruption, a journey that had begun with a disguise and culminated in a new era of justice. The FBI's arrests of Sergeant Paul Grayson and his conspirators had shattered the old guard. Their convictions for obstruction, falsification, and intimidation, a public reckoning that exposed decades of buried complaints and payoffs. James's reforms, once a bold vision, were now the precinct's backbone: mandatory anti-bias training, a civilian oversight board, body cam transparency, and a mental health program for officers. Each policy a brick in a foundation of trust. The precinct, once a fortress of unchecked power, was realigning. With over half its officers enrolled in the training led by Lieutenant David Kim, their attitudes shifting from skepticism to cautious embrace. While those loyal to Grayson's legacy resigned, their exits a quiet victory. Captain Elena Torres, James's steadfast deputy, oversaw a task force that reopened dozens of mishandled cases, securing justice for victims like the black driver brutalized in 2016 and the Latino activist framed in 2014, their gratitude a fuel for James's mission. Maria Sanchez, the whistleblower whose courage sparked the turning point, became a reform ambassador, training recruits to uphold integrity, her story inspiring a new generation. The community's support was a tidal wave. Reverend Clara Thompson and Marcus Bell's rallies evolved into a permanent coalition, their community policing program, now a national model, reducing arrests through dialogue, with James and Kim joining patrols, Their presence a bridge to neighborhoods once wary. Donations to the Reform Fund soared past $600,000 funding scholarships for youth in policing and legal aid for victims. While a Black-owned bookstore gifted James a plaque inscribed Chief Unbroken, a title echoed in headlines. The precinct's culture was reborn. Officers reported misconduct via the hotline, their tips leading to further suspensions, and the oversight board, chaired by a Latino educator, ensured accountability. Its first report praising James's transparency. Nationally, his impact rippled a federal bill, inspired by his reforms, mandated oversight for police misconduct, while departments from Atlanta to Seattle adopted his body cam and training models. A CNN documentary, Unmasked James Whitaker's Revolution, chronicled his path from humiliated janitor to transformative chief, with Clara and Marcus hailing him as a beacon of truth. James watched it with Elena, his rare smile breaking through when Sanchez appeared, calling him the chief who changed the rules. The threats, though fewer, lingered a slashed tire, a hateful note, but James faced them with the calm he'd shown under Callahan's water spray. His security detail a necessity he accepted, his mother's voice a daily anchor. "You've remade the world, son." He visited her, her embrace a sanctuary, her words echoing his late brother's dream of a just system. The reason James had taken this path, the precinct's mental health program, a first in the state, reduced officer burnout, winning over holdouts. While the community walk-alongs drew global attention, with a UN panel inviting James to speak on policing equity, his badge a symbol on an international stage. The old guard's influence was a fading shadow, their union's protests ignored, replaced by a unity forged in accountability. A year after his revelation, a ceremony unveiled a plaque outside the precinct, inscribed for James Whitaker, Chief of Resilience, who built justice through truth. James spoke briefly, his voice steady. "This is for every voice we failed, every chance we seized to be better," he said, gesturing to the crowd. Clara, Marcus, Sanchez, Kim, Elena, and thousands more. Their applause a thunder, veterans saluting, youth chanting his name. A Black teenager, inspired by the scholarship fund, approached James, her eyes bright. "I want to be a cop like you," she said, her words a spark for the future. James nodded, his heart full, his badge a vow kept. The precinct was no longer a place of shame but a model of reform, its officers patrolling with purpose, its complaints down, its trust up. The mural of James's badge, a landmark for change. He returned to his office, a letter from his brother, written before his death. On his desk, "Fix what's broken. James." He touched it, his eyes wet but his resolve unshaken. A chief who turned scorn into salvation. The fight for justice continued, but James Whitaker, unmasked and unbroken, had become a symbol of what truth could achieve. His legacy and a blueprint for a system reborn, a nation ready to heal through courage and accountability. From mocked outsider to transformative chief, James Whitaker exposed corruption and rebuilt justice. Thank you for watching. Don't like, share, and subscribe to never miss a story. Hit the bell for our latest videos and join us in honoring resilience and reform.